Retired human lived alone for years, until 4 alien brides arrived asking for his help. The rain hammered the roof like 1,000 fists. Wind howled through the valley, rattling the shutters and bending the old trees near the fence line. Henry Cole was used to storms out here on his ranch, but that night felt different. The rain came in sheets so heavy it blurred the hills into shadows, and the thunder shook the earth hard enough to rattle the nails in the walls. He sat in silence, staring at the fire in the hearth, until he heard it. A noise, not the wind, not the creak of wood. Something else came from the barn. A thud, then a sharp scrape, like claws or boots dragging across the floor. Henry's jaw tightened. Coyotes maybe, or someone desperate enough to break into his land. He reached for the rifle that leaned by the door, an old companion worn smooth by years of use, and stepped into the storm. The rain struck his face like needles. Mud clung to his boots as he crossed the yard, the beam of his lantern slicing through the downpour. The barn loomed ahead, its doors shuddering in the wind. Another sound came, muffled but unmistakable. Breathing. Henry shoved the door open and raised the rifle. What he saw made him stop cold. For figures huddled in the corner, drenched and trembling, their eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight. Their skin shimmered with strange markings that pulsed like fire beneath the surface. Metal bands circled their wrists, etched with symbols that caught the light in sharp lines. They were not human. The tallest of them rose unsteadily to her feet. Her long dark hair clung to her face, and water dripped from her clothes onto the dirt. Golden eyes met Henry's, fierce even through exhaustion. She raised her hands slowly, not in attack but in appeal. "Human," she said in broken English, her voice raw from cold and fear. "Help us, please." The words froze Henry where he stood. His finger lingered on the trigger, but something in her eyes stopped him from pulling it. Behind her, the youngest of the group shifted nervously, her movements quick and restless, like a bird ready to flee. Another remained seated, quiet and withdrawn, her head bowed as if carrying a weight too heavy for her shoulders. The fourth stood like a shield, her posture tense, her body angled protectively in front of the others. Henry lowered the rifle, though he did not put it down. His voice came out hard and flat. "Who are you? What are you doing in my barn?" The leader swallowed hard before answering. "We run, taken as brides, escaped. Hunters chase us. Nowhere safe." She drew a shaky breath, her words heavy with desperation. "You must help." The rain pounded on the roof, thunder shaking the walls around them. Henry's thoughts spun. He had built this life to be alone, to leave the world and its wars behind. And yet, standing in his barn, 4 alien women begged for his protection. Henry Cole had no family, no neighbors, no one who would come looking for him if trouble struck. That was the way he had wanted it. But as the storm raged outside and the 4 strangers shivered before him, he felt the old weight of choice settle on his shoulders. For the first time in years, Henry did not know what he would do. Henry did not let them into the cabin that first night. His trust was not something he gave lightly. He brought blankets from a trunk, set a lantern on a crate, and left them in the barn with a sharp warning. "Stay here. Try nothing." He sat on an overturned bucket near the door, rifle across his knees, listening as the storm hammered the roof. The 4 strangers huddled together, whispering in a language he could not understand. From time to time, one of them looked toward him, sharp, wary glances, as if gauging whether this man with the rifle was safer than the hunters chasing them. When dawn came, the storm passed. Sunlight spilled across the hills, steam rising from the soaked ground. Henry pushed the barn doors wide and finally saw them clearly in daylight. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. Their skin bore faint markings that glowed softly when the sun touched them, like patterns alive beneath the surface. Their eyes carried strange colors, hues no human iris had ever held. The bands on their wrists shimmered with etched symbols, ceremonial in design but cold, as though forged by force, not choice. The tallest stepped forward again. She straightened her back despite her exhaustion, her voice calm, controlled. "My name is Celine. We are from beyond this world." We were chosen as brides. Not for love. For pride. For warlords. Her gaze did not waver. We escaped. Henry studied her face. She had the eyes of someone used to command, to making decisions no one else wanted. The youngest could not hold still. She darted out from behind Celine, her short hair plastered to her forehead, her voice sharp and quick. You do not believe, do you? You think we are tricks. But look! She held up her wrists, the metal bands catching the light. These bind us. These mark us. You think we chose this? Her words tumbled fast, anger mixing with fear. Celine placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. Ori, she said softly, a warning tone. The quiet one lifted her head then. Her face was pale, her eyes tired but clear. I am Rinna, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We only ask for shelter, just until the danger passes. The fourth had not spoken. She stood near the others, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on Henry as though he were another enemy. When her gaze met his, it was like the clash of two blades, unflinching, unwilling to bend. Celine gestured toward her. That is Lyra. She does not trust easily. Henry let out a dry laugh, low and humorless. Neither do I. He wanted to tell them to leave, to walk back into the hills and take their trouble with them. But as his eyes swept across their faces, he saw more than strangers. He saw fear trying to hide behind pride. He saw exhaustion buried under strength. He saw the kind of desperation that only came from running too long. Against his better judgment, he said, You can stay, for now, but you follow my rules. My land, my say. Relief rippled through them, subtle but unmistakable. Ori smiled for the first time, quick and bright. Rinna bowed her head, whispering something he could not catch. Celine's shoulders eased, though she did not smile. Lyra only crossed her arms, still watching him as if waiting for him to prove himself. The days that followed were strange. Celine took to the animals with a natural calm, brushing down the horses, feeding the cattle, moving among them with a gentleness that surprised Henry. The animals, usually wary of strangers, seemed to accept her without question. Ori followed Henry everywhere. She asked questions endlessly, her voice cutting into the silence he had lived with for years. Why do you wear that hat? Why does the water here taste different? Why do you live so far from the others of your kind? She tugged at everything, poked at tools, tried to copy his movements. At first, Henry snapped at her to stop, but she only grinned, unshaken. Rinna spent her hours by the fire inside the cabin, sitting cross-legged with her hands folded neatly in her lap. She asked him about the war he had once fought in, her quiet voice drawing stories from him he had thought buried. He found himself speaking more than he expected, about comrades lost, about the noise of battle, about the silence that followed. Rinna listened without judgment, her dark eyes steady, as if she carried each word carefully. Lyra worked. She lifted fence posts, carried tools, repaired the barn roof beside him. She did not ask, she simply did. Henry respected that. She said little, but when their eyes met across the field, there was a silent understanding. Two people who had seen enough of the world's cruelty to know trust had to be earned with action, not words. At night, the five of them sat together by the fire. Henry had not shared that space with anyone in years. He watched them sometimes when they thought he was not looking. Celine staring into the flames as if weighing choices heavier than the world. Ori whispering questions into the dark, still too restless to sleep. Rinna closing her eyes, lips moving in silent prayer. Lyra sharpening her blades with careful, practiced strokes. It unsettled him, but it also stirred something inside him that had been buried long ago. A sense of being part of something larger than himself. He had lived like a ghost for years. Now, for reasons he could not yet explain, he felt alive again. The ranch grew louder with life than Henry had ever thought possible. Days stretched into a strange rhythm. 5 sets of footsteps on the porch. 5 voices at the table. 5 shadows against the sunset. But even as he adjusted to their presence, Henry felt unease creeping in at the edges of his land. The world outside the ranch was not quiet. It was watching. The first sign came one evening while he was hauling buckets of water from the well. The horses suddenly reared, ears twitching, eyes wide. Their gaze was locked on the hills, where a faint shimmer of light hung in the twilight. At first Henry thought it was lightning, but it did not fade. It lingered, steady and deliberate, before slipping away into the dark. When he returned, Celine's eyes went immediately to his face. "You saw it too," she said softly, as though confirming a truth she had been dreading. Later that night, Henry heard the cattle lowing nervously. He stepped onto the porch with his rifle, scanning the fields. The sky was clear, the moon full, and yet he felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Shapes moved just beyond the tree line. Not animals. Too smooth, too coordinated. The next morning, while he was chopping firewood, the comm unit inside the cabin crackled to life. Henry froze. That device had been silent for years. Now static hissed, followed by a voice so guttural and cold it seemed to vibrate through his bones. "Return what is ours, human, or your land will burn." The words repeated once more before dissolving into static. Henry shut it off, his jaw tight, but the women had heard. Ori dropped the pan she had been holding, the clatter ringing through the cabin. Rinna's face went pale as ash. Celine closed her eyes, her shoulders heavy. Lyra's hand went instinctively to the hilt of her blades. "They have found us," Celine said finally, her voice quiet but certain. Henry paced the floor, his mind racing. His instinct screamed at him to cut ties, to send them away before the storm broke over his ranch. "If you stay, they will bring war here," he said flatly. Celine met his gaze. "If we leave, we die. The hunters will not stop. They are bound to their warlords. They hunt until there is nothing left." Ori's voice cracked as she tried to speak, her usual energy shaken. "We do not want to bring this to you. We should go." Rinna's hands trembled as she folded them together. "He has already done more than we could ask. We cannot ask him to fight for us." Lyra said nothing. She only stood near Henry, her posture hard, her eyes steady on his face. Henry looked at them all. He had built this life to escape the weight of decisions like this. But here it was again, pressing down on him like it always had in the war. He remembered faces of soldiers who had followed him, trusted him, depended on him. He remembered the cost of turning away. He thought of Celine's quiet strength, of Ori's endless questions that had broken through his silence, of Rinna's listening eyes that had held his pain without judgment, of Lyra's unspoken trust beside him in the fields. The choice was already made. "You stay," Henry said. His voice carried no hesitation now. "If they come, we fight." The words seemed to change the air in the room. Celine's eyes softened, gratitude breaking through her composure. Ori gave a trembling laugh, half relief, half disbelief. Rinna closed her eyes, whispering something in her language. Lyra only nodded once, sharp and sure, as though she had expected nothing less. Henry walked to the door, staring out across the fields that had been his sanctuary. They would not be fields much longer. They would be trenches, firing lines, kill zones. He tightened his grip on the rifle. He had left war behind once. Now it had come to find him again. But this time he would not fight for duty or country or orders. This time he would fight for them. The ranch became a fortress. Henry moved with purpose he had not felt in years, his soldier's instincts flooding back like muscle memory. He dragged old crates of supplies out from storage, dug through rusted metal bins until his hands found tripwire, signal flares, even the grenades he swore he would never touch again. He mapped the land in his head the way he once mapped enemy strongholds. Every fence line, every hollow, every stretch of open field. The women watched him work, then slowly joined in. Celine carried water to the cattle and helped herd them deeper into the corral, out of the line of fire. Ori fetched nails, rope, and scrap metal, her questions replaced by grim determination. Rinna followed Henry step for step, listening, learning, asking careful questions only when she needed to. Lyra worked silently at his side, her strong hands lifting beams and hammering stakes, her blades always close at her hip. At dusk, Henry walked the perimeter. He strung wire low between fence posts, camouflaged with brush. He dug shallow pits near the north field, covering them with loose boards and dirt. On the porch, he mounted an old rifle in a fixed position, sighted toward the tree line. The land that had once been his quiet refuge now bristled with deadly intent. The women gathered in the barn that night, the air thick with anticipation. Henry checked his rifle for the 10th time. "They will come after dark," he said, his voice steady. "They want the cover of night." Celine lifted her staff, its surface glowing faintly with alien energy. "Then we will be ready." The night grew still, too still. Even the crickets had gone silent. Then, a faint hum drifted through the air. Unnatural, electric. Lights shimmered at the edge of the forest. Figures emerged, tall and armored, their movements precise. The hunters. Their helmets glowed with faint blue visors, scanning, calculating. Plasma rifles hung ready in their hands. Henry raised his rifle, breath slow, steady. "Wait," he whispered. "Let them step into the field." The hunters advanced, confident, their visors sweeping over the land. One triggered the first tripwire. A flare shot into the sky, bursting red and white across the night. The hunters froze. Henry fired. The first shot dropped one cleanly, the crack echoing across the ranch. The others spread instantly, returning fire. Plasma bolts lit the darkness, searing into the barn walls, scorching the dirt near the porch. The peaceful ranch exploded into war. Lyra surged forward, her blades flashing silver in the firelight. She moved like a storm, slashing, spinning, cutting down one hunter before he could raise his rifle. A plasma bolt grazed her arm, but she did not falter. Celine stood tall, her staff pulsing with energy. She swept it across the ground, sending a shockwave that staggered two hunters back into the pit Henry had dug. They fell, their armor cracking against the hidden boards. Ori scrambled behind Henry, fumbling with ammo, her small hands shaking but quick. "Here!" she cried, shoving another clip into his palm. Henry reloaded smoothly, firing again, his shots precise, trained. Every bullet found its mark. Rinna crouched near the porch, her calm voice carrying through the chaos. "Left side. Two moving low." Henry shifted his aim without hesitation, cutting them down before they could flank. The hunters pressed hard, their rifles spitting fire that lit the fields in a deadly glow. Henry dove behind a trough, plasma searing past his head. He popped up, fired, dropped one, then ducked again as the air sizzled with heat. Lyra clashed with another, their blades ringing, sparks flying. She fought with raw strength, driving him back step by step. Celine joined her, staff and blade moving in perfect rhythm, driving the hunters into retreat. But more came. A fresh wave emerged from the trees, larger, heavier, carrying heavier weapons. One raised a launcher. Henry's stomach dropped. "Down!" he roared. The shot fired, the blast tearing a chunk from the barn wall, splinters raining like shrapnel. Smoke choked the air. Henry coughed, blinking through the haze. He could not see all of them, but he could hear the crackle of plasma, the hiss of boots crushing grass, the growls of hunters closing in. He moved quickly, planting one of his grenades into the dirt. "Back!" he shouted. The women ducked low. He pulled the pin, tossed it. The blast shook the ground, shredding the nearest group into silence. But not all. One hunter broke through, charging the porch. Henry raised his rifle, but the magazine clicked empty. Too slow. The hunter loomed, blade high. Then Lyra was there, slamming into him, her own blades crossing in a deadly arc. She drove him back, teeth clenched, muscles straining until the alien collapsed, his weapon clattering useless into the dirt. She stood over him, chest heaving, then glanced at Henry. Their eyes locked. No words passed, but none were needed. The battle raged on. Hours seemed to stretch into seconds. Fire scarred the earth, smoke curled across the fields, and the peaceful ranch lay torn in the chaos of war. At last, When the final flare of plasma died out and the last hunter fell silent, the land grew still again. Henry lowered his rifle slowly, his arms heavy, his breath ragged. Around him, the women stood bloodied but alive. Celine leaned on her staff, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Ori slumped against the porch, dirt and ash streaking her face, but her eyes still bright. Rinna moved quietly among them, tending wounds with steady hands. Lyra wiped her blades clean on the grass, her expression unreadable, her gaze drifting back to Henry. The ranch was scarred, the fences broken, the barn torn, the ground blackened by fire. But it stood. They stood. Together. Henry looked over them. These strange, fierce women who had come crashing into his solitude, and felt the weight of silence after battle. He had fought again, bled again, killed again. But for the first time in years, he did not feel hollow afterward. He felt alive. Dawn came slow. The smoke still clung to the fields, curling in the morning air. The smell of scorched wood and plasma hung heavy, carried on the breeze. Henry sat on the porch steps, his rifle across his lap, staring out over the battered ranch. The land he had once kept so quiet was torn and broken. Fences lay twisted, the barn was charred, the ground pitted with craters. But for all the ruin, there was something more important still standing. Them. Celine leaned against the railing, her staff resting across her knees. Her calm face was pale, her golden eyes tired but unbroken. She glanced at Henry, her expression carrying both gratitude and sorrow. Ori sat on the porch floor, knees pulled to her chest. She traced little shapes in the dirt with one finger, her usual chatter quieted. When she caught Henry watching, she tried to give a smile. It was small, shaky, but real. Rinna moved carefully between them all, tending wounds with quiet hands. She tore strips of cloth, pressed them against burns and cuts, murmuring in her soft voice words Henry could not understand but somehow felt soothing all the same. Lyra stood apart from the rest, her blades sheathed, her eyes scanning the horizon as if daring another wave of hunters to appear. But every so often, her gaze flicked to Henry, and lingered just a little longer than before. The silence was broken by Celine. "It is over," she said quietly. "For now. But the warlords will not stop forever." Henry grunted. "Then what now? You cannot stay here. They know this place." Celine's gaze shifted to the hills. "We will call for aid. Our people, the ones who resisted, they have not forgotten us. With the right signal, they will come." She lifted her wristband, pressing a sequence into the glowing symbols. A faint hum filled the air, followed by a pulse of blue light that shot skyward, disappearing into the clouds. For a long while, there was nothing but the quiet crackle of smoldering wood and the tired breathing of survivors. Then, hours later, a shape appeared in the sky. A ship, sleek and silver, descending slowly through the morning mist. It landed just beyond the field, its engines stirring the ash into spirals. The ramp lowered. Figures stood waiting. Not hunters this time, but allies, dressed in softer colors, their postures open, not hostile. Relief washed over Celine's face. She turned to Henry. "This is where we part." Ori's voice wavered. "I do not want to leave him." Celine placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "We must, Ori. This is not our home." Rinna stepped forward, her dark eyes meeting Henry's. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You gave us more than shelter. You gave us hope." She bowed her head deeply, a gesture of respect. Ori darted to him next, throwing her arms around his shoulders before he could react. "You will not forget us, right?" she said quickly, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Promise." Henry's chest tightened. He placed a hand gently on her back. "I will not forget." Celine came last. She stood before him, her presence calm as ever. "You did not have to fight for us, but you did. That choice will not be forgotten." She lifted her staff in a gesture of honor, then turned toward the ship. One by one they began to walk, all except Lyra. She stayed rooted where she was, her eyes locked on Henry. When Celine called her name, she did not move. Instead, She stepped closer to him. Her voice, usually edged with steel, was softer now. I was promised to a man I never wanted. A man who would have owned me like a weapon. But I choose. She paused, her gaze fierce, unwavering. And I choose you. Henry's throat tightened. He had no words, only the weight of her gaze, the unshakable truth in it. Celine looked back once from the ship's ramp. She said nothing, but the faintest smile touched her lips before she turned away. The others followed her inside, the ramp rising, the engines lifting them into the sky. Henry and Lyra stood side by side, watching as the ship became a speck, then vanished into the clouds. Silence fell over the ranch once more, but it was a different silence than before. Not hollow, not empty. Lyra turned to him, her golden markings glowing faintly in the morning light. Your land is broken, she said simply. Henry gave a dry chuckle. So am I. For the first time, her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. They stood together on the porch, the sunrise spilling gold across the scarred earth. The fences could be rebuilt, the barn repaired, the land healed, and so could he. For the first time in years, Henry felt like he had something worth living for. Not the land, not the quiet, but the woman standing beside him, fierce and unyielding, who had chosen him when she could have walked away. The war had followed him to his doorstep, but from its ashes, something new had taken root. A beginning,